Going live in five, four, three, two, and go ahead.
Good evening and welcome back to the Hoffman Law Show. I'm Jennifer Hoffman, your host. I am here today with a very special guest, Catherine Marshall. She is an employment lawyer with Melbourne Law, and just before the break, we talked about the effect that COVID's been having, not just on people who are getting sick with COVID, but also in society in general, in terms of the mental health component of COVID and how it's been impacting people's ability to work and function. And so we were having a bit of a discussion about how what we're seeing in the long-term disability world in terms of people applying for LTD benefits because of their psychiatric conditions arising out of COVID. And there certainly has been a rise in those types of applications. And so it's very fitting today that we bring Catherine on our show because she's going to be talking to us a little bit more about the effect or the interplay between COVID and work from an employment law perspective. She's going to give us a little bit of insight on the obligations that both employers and employees have in light of the situation that we're in light of the vaccine passports and vaccines in general, and how they are going to be treated in the workplace. So welcome to the show, Catherine.
Thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. Can you tell our viewers a little bit more about your practice and what you do day to day?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm an employment lawyer. I primarily act for employees, and I deal with issues from workplace harassment, wrongful dismissal, constructive dismissal, disability accommodation, you name it, I'm dealing with it in the workplace. And there are a lot of issues that have been COVID related, as you pointed out. So it's been a bit of a wild ride.
I can imagine. I'm sure you're getting a lot of calls the past couple of years about COVID and people's ability to return to work. So let me dive right into this. I think that this is the question that everybody wants to know, or in everybody's minds. Can employers mandate vaccines in the workplace?
Yes, they can. And the government is definitely making that easier for them. Actually, I noticed yesterday the Ontario Human Rights Commission came out with a policy guideline that actually said that it's not discriminatory to mandate vaccines, and that if someone has a just personal preference against a vaccine, or just a personal reason why they don't want to have the vaccine, that they're not protected under the law from refusing to get the vaccine. So yes, they can, and they are, and they will.
Wow, that is incredible. And it's incredible for me to hear this in light of the country that we live in and our constitution and human rights. So this is definitely a big turning point, I think, in the way that we're going to be interpreting human rights moving forward.
Yeah, I think people's notion of civil liberties has really changed throughout the pandemic with the lockdowns and all the restrictions that are now imposed on the public spaces and schools and now workplaces. It's become sort of normal for people, but
And
definitely
rights
for
moving
Canada, it's
forward.
something that's sort of I think newer. people.
Yeah, absolutely. I never imagined that this could happen here. But can you tell us? Can an employer actually prevent an employee from coming into the office if that employee is not vaccinated?
Yes, they can. I know that a lot of employers are going to be mandating vaccination policies at work, because I'm getting a lot of phone calls from employers asking me how to do this. But what employers are allowed to do is they can say that their workplace is a mandatory vaccine zone. So if you are coming into the office, you have to be vaccinated. Now, what employers have to do is they have to accommodate employees who are not able to get a vaccination for either a medical reason or a religious reason. And accommodation would be, allowing them to work from home if that's an option. Also, if someone's just unvaccinated in the workplace because they just don't want to get the vaccination, they still have to be accommodated as well. There hasn't yet been a case that I'm aware of where the court has ruled on whether or not it's proper to fire someone for refusing to get vaccinated. I'm going to guess that it would be not right, that employers will not be able to get away with that. If they're able to accommodate someone working from home, or even like having a rapid test to come into the workplace, that they should have to do that. Now, if you're an employer in like a hospital, or you're in a really high risk group like a long-term care home, that might be a little different. I can see the courts justifying like a mandatory vaccination for people who are working for like in a high risk environment.
So it potentially will be very situation specific as well.
Definitely.
In terms of the type of work and the type of environment. And I guess that makes sense. So you said earlier that you had mentioned people not getting vaccinated, and that there's a difference between someone who chooses not to get vaccinated because they just don't want to get vaccinated, and then people that have a medical or any sort of legitimate exemption from the vaccine. Is there a distinction in terms of the employer's obligations to accommodate in those circumstances?
Yes, there is. Under the Ontario Human Rights Code, and every province has their own human rights codes, employers are not allowed to discriminate against people on the basis of disability or religion. And so if someone is not able to get a vaccination because they're, immunocompromised and their doctor's saying, don't get it, or they have a religious belief that prevents them from getting it, the employer is not allowed to punish and fire that person. They have a duty to respect that person's human right and accommodate that person. Now, the parameters of what is a legitimate medical accommodation are going to be, I think, quite strict. And the Ontario Human Rights Commission has already come out and said that employers are allowed to get a doctor's note, and they would require like medical documentation saying this person can't get the vaccine, and I'm recommending they do not get it. It can't be something like, oh, I read on the internet that a vaccine, the vaccine causes this or that. It's got to be legitimate.
Interesting. And what about someone who just chooses, let's say this person who read on the internet, or someone just chooses not to get the vaccine. In those circumstances, if the employer has the ability to, or has, let's say, a virtual workspace set up, and so that is an option, will, under those circumstances, the employer have a bigger obligation to accommodate an employee, regardless of the reason that they're not vaccinated?
Definitely. I don't see employers being able to get away with, firing someone because they choose not to get vaccinated when they have the ability to allow that person to work remotely or do like a rapid test, if especially if the work environment is like, an office where people are distanced and they're not public facing, and there really isn't like an acute health issue where, there's at-risk people there, like a hospital. So I think employers should definitely be a little cautious on being overzealous with, oh, if you're not vaccinated, you're going to get fired. I mean, that's not what the law in Canada says right now. That is probably not going to be supported by the courts. They are going to have to, accommodate people's working abilities. And the reality is, in 2021, most people can do a lot of parts of their job remotely. So that should be something that, employers do explore as well.
Yeah, and that's something that I've been thinking about lately because, if anything, COVID has sort of forced us to rethink the way we work and to rethink our workspaces. And a lot of a lot of businesses, a lot of employers have implemented some sort of remote workspace or virtual workspace, and so that seems to be a viable option in many workplaces.
Oh, definitely. And, employers have invested in some cases, hundreds of thousands of dollars in this remote technology. Actually, you brought up remote working, and I think it's an interesting comment that, I am seeing a lot of people in my office these days who are suffering from severe mental burnout and exhaustion just from the working culture of constant remote work and not unplugging and not disconnecting. There's definitely a big desire to go back to the office that I am seeing, and I'm seeing a lot of employers wanting to recall people back to the office, just for the human element and health. So that's going to make the vaccine issue a lot more paramount, because you do have workplaces where what if you have 2 people who aren't vaccinated and they get left out of everything because they're at home and they can't come in, and that's going to be an issue.
Yeah, so it's going to have a lot of other kind of peripheral, an impact on many other aspects of work, right? It's going to have an impact on the social aspect of work and people's mental health, and so that's what we were talking about actually just earlier in the show, is that we're seeing an uprise, obviously, or in mental health conditions and people's challenges with mental health as well. Okay, so this is incredibly interesting, and we're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we come back, we'll chat a little bit more.
All right, great.
Our company is committed to providing truthful, honest, competent, and result-oriented service advising and representing our clients in Canada and overseas in a wide range of immigration matters. We focus on providing support, building dependable relationships, and promoting success. We are dedicated to understanding what results you want, to helping you understand what action to take on your behalf.
Welcome back to the Hoffman Law Show. We're here today with Catherine Marshall. She's a lawyer and associate at Milborn Law, and she is an expert in employment law. She's here today to discuss with us the effects of COVID on return to work, and more specifically now with this vaccine passports and how that's going to affect civil liberties, as we were talking about during the commercial break, as well as people's ability to return to work. So let me ask you this. Do you have any tips or suggestions for employers who would prefer to have their employees back in the physical workspace, but are hesitant or scared to ask for vaccine information or for medical exemptions to the vaccine. I know it's a bit of a touchy subject, and I know many employers are kind of hesitant to even touch that topic.
Yeah, I know a lot of employers are very uncomfortable about the idea of asking for people's health information. It does feel like a privacy violation. My advice to employers would be, if your workforce has been at home during the pandemic and you want them to start coming back in, first of all, do it gradually. Don't go from 0 to 100, but have a policy in place about vaccines. It doesn't necessarily need to be mandatory vaccination for the workplace, but have some form of a policy, because otherwise people are not really going to know what to do. They're going to feel uncomfortable. They're going to feel like, do I have to ask? Do I have to have a paper? Do I have to find out if my colleague is vaccinated? What if someone's coughing? Do I have to run away? Don't ignore the issue, because it's a real issue. And as the employer, you do have an obligation to show some leadership on it. And you can't pretend like it's not there. A policy needs to be brought in that just is understandable and that people can have access to. And go from there. Don't let there be a vacuum, because that's going to be confusing for your employees.
And do you suggest that employers actually put together something in writing, have some sort of manual that's sent out to all of the employees so that everybody understands what the policy is and everybody's sort of on the same page in terms of expectations?
Yes, I think employers should have a policy where it's sent out by email. It should be communicated to employees before they return to the workplace. And it doesn't need to be, 10 pages long. It can be a really simple, like 1 or 2 page policy that just explains like what are the requirements for being vaccinated, not only for yourself, but, if you're having a visitor, do you have clients that are coming into the office? Do you have family members that are coming in, dropping off lunch? Is there a requirement for them to be vaccinated? What are the requirements for symptoms? If you have a runny nose, can you come in or do you stay home? All that kind of stuff should be thought about and put together in a policy that's sent to your workers before they come in. And it's going to, prevent a lot of confusion and potentially liability as well. I know some employers are taking the approach of like mandatory vaccination. Actually, many are taking that approach, but I've also seen some employers adopt a policy of not mandatory, but you have to do rapid tests, or, you can't come in if you're exhibiting any symptoms. I think every employer just has to do what is going to make their workplace safe. And that is, again, going to be really case by case. If you run a long-term healthcare, long-term home, you should probably be really, really cautious about who you are letting in the door who has been unvaccinated.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because of, you've got people in that home who are very susceptible to COVID.
Right. And I think we're seeing more and more of this. I mean, I know in a lot of the healthcare fields, it's a lot of employers have sent out letters to employees giving them a deadline by which they have to show proof of vaccination. And so I'm sure you've had to deal with that over the past few months. People calling with respect to these letters that they're receiving from employers. Catherine, if any clients or any of our listeners need to contact you, how do we get a hold of you?
Probably the best way would be to email me it's kmarshall@milburnlaw.ca. I don't know if we want to put up like a...
Yeah, so
it's already up there.
Yeah,
okay,
your
great.
Your email is right there on the screen. So for anyone who's listening, if you have any questions relating to your obligations, be it if you're an employer or an employee and you want to know what you should do, you want to know about next steps, don't hesitate to contact Catherine. She can probably easily walk you through the process, give you suggestions that would be applicable to your particular business, to your particular work situation. Her email is up on the screen, and I'm assuming there's also a number they can reach you at.
You know what? Email is definitely the ideal for me.
Better than better than calling. Okay.
Better than calling. Yeah.
Okay. Better than calling.
I don't check my voicemail very much. It's
Fair enough.
It's a problem.
You know what? Honestly, neither do I. I'm working on it.
Yeah.
But okay. Is there any other thoughts or any other information that you'd like the listeners to hear about today?
You know what? The main thing is, pay attention to what the government's putting out in the next couple of weeks, because they are going to be putting out a lot of directions, I think, to help alleviate the confusion a lot of employers are having about what they should do. I think the government is going to be leading the way on that, so you can pay attention to whatever they come out with, and it will probably evolve over time.
Yeah, I'm sure, as this thing has, to Catherine's point, it's very important to try and stay on top of some of the recommendations and some of the changes that we're seeing coming out of the government. It's going to be very interesting to see what happens in the next few months with these vaccine passports and how they're going to be implemented. I'm sure we're going to see some interesting case law coming out of that, and interesting cases.
Oh, yes. There will be litigation.
There will be litigation, and this is how law is made, people.
Yes.
So I think from a legal perspective, at least, it's going to be a very interesting next few years as these cases make their way through the court systems.
Definitely.
Yeah. So again, if anyone has any questions related to anything, unemployment law, I know today we're focusing on the impact of COVID and people's ability to work or employers' obligations, but Catherine practices in all areas of employment law, including wrongful dismissal, other human rights complaints. So if anyone needs the assistance of an employment lawyer, please don't hesitate to contact Catherine. Her email is on the screen. It's kmarshall@melbournelaw.ca. And of course, as always, for any of our viewers who have any questions related to personal injury, disability, or medical conditions that impact your ability to work, don't hesitate to call us at Hoffman Law, 416-631-0000. You can also email me at jhoffman@hoffmanlaw. Consultations are always free. And we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for being here today,
Thanks
Catherine.
for having me.
Our pleasure.